So, hello, my name is Delaney Keating, and I'm actually sitting today in Creede, Colorado, within the Creede Repertory Theater, which is just sort of a wonderful experience and kind of a perfect place to be when you start to think about the power of branding and creative culture. And yes, in my day job, I live in Gunnison, Colorado, and own Rochambeau Marketing and Creative. In within my presentation here, I feel like I have to make the disclaimer. I'm sort of one part designer and one part what I call professional storyteller. Um, to pack as much as I could into this presentation with the time that I could allot myself, I sort of sacrificed fashion for function. So you'll just enjoy some very plain looking slides. Moving in, I've included a photo of myself. Since we have this sort of abstract digital world, you can at least sort of see a little bit of who you're talking to or who you're listening to as we move through this. I like to sort of share this photo and talk about why I use this photo in a lot of my communications and for my bio and things like that versus a regular headshot. The idea of this photo is that this photo tells a story about me a little bit. You can see that I'm eating an apple, and so I'm obviously somebody who enjoys apples, and that's something you can sort of assume about me. And that part of my story. And it's something that people know about me on the ground. I pretty much eat an apple every day, and they are my sort of daily meditation and a food that I eat because I can't multitask while I'm doing it. So I always encourage people with even those very simple things that we think of and how can you add depth and dimension to even something as simple as, say, your headshot and drive some question and curiosity about who you are and maybe what your values are. As we go into branding, and branding is story, I think it's really important to note in developing culture around branding and community and this art of stories, because story is really an inherent human practice. It is one of those things that separates us from the animal world. And it's how we connect and define ourselves and identify ourselves with a community and within a community. And so I really believe in the importance of story. And it really resonates in our most sort of centered core self within the core of our brain. Story is one of the most important elements that drives us every day. As we look at developing a brand, we want to develop a brand that can speak with people. And that's something a story does. And so you have to start to look at the elements of story, sort of that who, what, and why. And what are the elements of your story? As we go into this, we will talk about character development, emotional engagement, and then a fun new thing we've started to incorporate, and that is answering your why. And why is why so important? Going into character development, to have a brand narrative, we in our work believe you must first define the narrator. We've actually established in our work at Rochambeau what we call our intake form, and in that we ask people to personify their brand. Humans love to personify the world around them, and it allows for some emotional engagement. And people have very sort of relationships with brands. So if you're having a relationship with a brand, it has a character set to it. And so we need to define that character set. I don't have time to kind of show some of the highlights within our intake form, but if you're interested in seeing it, if you request it, I will make sure you get it here next week when they send you other peripherals. As you go into this sort of idea of defining your narrator, we basically ask you to personify your brand, and you're building that character. And what this does is really help us look at patterns and trends within a brand. What's really nice about this process in creating your brand narrator, especially when you're dealing with larger organizations, communities, board-oriented nonprofits, things of that nature, instead of a bunch of people around a table sort of debating about who they are, we can have them individually and privately fill out this form, and then we watch for emergent patterns on that form, and then we come back and we present to them the patterns that they've reflected and how they speak about themselves. And so through that, we find that we're able to really well define tone and sort of begin to decipher sort of what does the brand actually sound like. And that's a really important piece when you're driving this art of story. And this, again, also helps define patterns about your brand and the belief systems of your ideal customer, because it is something that you're basically asking your customer to have a relationship with. Another piece is emotional engagement, and that's a really core part of branding. Since the beginning of time, you're building loyalty and trust, and that has to happen on an emotional level. Something we find really interesting and we really love about our work right now is we've sort of, in our culture, it's really fun to look at, we've basically left the industrial age and we're moving into the experiential age. And we're sort of right on the cusp. And we've basically, if you kind of look at it, we have turned a page in our human story and we're entering the experiential age. And one of the wonderful things about this is that sort of, even current generations, but more so upcoming generations, they don't want to buy necessarily goods and services anymore. They want to buy experiences. So every industry sort of globally is really starting to have conversations around that everything we deliver must enhance the human experience. So anytime you're doing anything, you need to ask yourself, does this enhance the human experience? Because that will help drive and meet the needs of the experiential age consumer and help stay in tune with that need for emotional engagement. Another really key part about emotional engagement and something that's really come about with branding is that customers want authority within the experience of a brand and must feel a sense of connectedness and ownership within that brand, again, because it's a relationship. They're having a relationship with your brand. You can look at things, like I consider, like Google, I consider Google a good friend, I go to Google all the time. I ask Google for advice. So there's really key things like that, and that's sort of this beautiful relationship. Other things I've seen that sort of speak to the authority of a customer within a brand is I was recently purchased an item at Patagonia and needed to return it. And I went to their website, and on the contact page, when I was trying to get return information, there was this little disclaimer to the side, and it basically said, like, we love when you send us ideas, but please know that we're also having our own conversations, and whereas you may see some idea that you had for us come to light someday, please know that nothing you send us is essentially copyrighted. And you assume that information was there because Patagonia had some sort of incident happen where a customer sent them an idea, and because that idea sort of came to light within a product, that customer felt like they didn't get credit for it. And I thought that was really interesting, and obviously something that something had to happen, that a customer really felt enough of an experience and a connection with their brand that they were sending them information. And I think you see that a lot right now, and something that brands really have to be open to and to a certain extent release to. But watching that customers want authority within the experience of your brand is a really important piece in allowing them to, as you tell your story, allowing them to carry your story forward. This is one of my favorite pieces right now, and you can watch Simon Sinek and learn about his golden circles. He has a book out, but you can also take 15 minutes and watch his talk on TED.com. Simon Sinek basically looks at the concept of leadership, whether it's leadership within a company or a brand or something that happened that affected social change. He looks at why certain things came to lead an industry or lead a movement. And whereas most companies will come to the table and sell you something, most companies are telling you basically what they do. So you can take, and he'll take examples like Dell and Apple. So you can take Dell and Apple, and they're functionally sort of doing the same thing, but why does Apple excel so much more? And basically it can be broken down that Apple is selling you why they do what they do, and Dell is selling you just what they do. And so effectively, and sort of this, again, this sort of shift of ages in the industrial age, we were selling sort of the how and the what of the product, of the story. Instead of the why. So we've been working sort of from the outside of the circles to the center of the circles. And now moving forward, where real strength is sort of throughout time is that you start and you sell your why, and you sell why you do what you do. And what's really powerful about this is that is emotional engagement. What's really fun in the way Simon Sinek breaks this down is if we effectively sort of visualize in your mind that we lop off the top of our head and we look down at our brain. If we look down at our brain, what you're actually seeing is that the structure of our brain matches these three concentric circles. So at the outer edge of our brain is sort of where we disseminate and evolve around how, and then moving into the what. And at the center of our brain, in our limbic brain, is our why, and it's our belief center. And in that place is where we drive our own patterns around our beliefs and our behavior. And so I think this is really important. It's something that we really workshop with clients now before we drive towards, we start with the why. We want them to answer their why. We find that this really helps build a strong 30-second sort of elevator pitch, paring down their information into a very nice, concise, digestible bite. One sentence paring down to maybe 3 or 5 words, and driving some really effective taglines. This has also been a really powerful workshopping piece for boards and engaging them in their brand, and just getting them to sort of think about it in a different way, and encouraging them to really emotionally engage with their brand and that which they are selling. So once you have your story, and you've sort of developed this piece around your story and your brand narrator, and you have to kind of get into how are we going to disseminate the story, and where are we going to go? I think we all sort of know, or the longing goal is to build really strong third-party validation, strong word of mouth. Or what we like to call now is branding is gossip, which is just sort of a fun, engaging way to talk about it. And word of mouth is so important, and it's something we think about, that third-party validation piece. I always use the example that, I can tell you, that I'm just this really cool person, and effectually sort of coming from me directly, well, that just sounds kind of weird. But if Mario and Jamie tell you, oh, Delaney's this really cool person, you should get to know her, you'll start to think, yeah, I should probably do that. And so third-party validation is a really powerful piece in human behavior, and this kind of concept that branding is gossip. And gossip has sort of negative connotations, but it is a very powerful tool, and it's about story and the way people interact and share story within a culture. This week I was reading a piece, and this gentleman, Tim Lebrecht, said that your brand is what people say about you when you are not in the room. And I really love that. It makes me think that, if you sort of really break this down, that gossip is driven by stories we share and the people involved. Gossip is shared from our emotional center and either validates or reveals a conflict within our individual belief systems. So we can see how, humans basically share information, and wanting to really build strongly and understand that, and empower people to share your story, and the importance of this piece around third-party validation and letting your consumer carry your word forward for you is that it needs to be very concisely driven in the beginning, because you are essentially going to lose control of your brand at some point, and that is really kind of a beautiful process, even if it sounds sort of frightening at the outset. But so having really tight, concise language and really doing the legwork to define who you are on the ground at the beginning is going to be really strong in how your brand is carried forward, and does sort of give you that little bit of control. Which brings us to that control is lost. We say surrender to your audience. All control is lost. When we work with customers with new businesses, you see a lot of people really driven around, their idea and their dream of what they're doing, and a lot of times you'll see failure because they didn't allow their model to mold to their audience. So that piece is really important, and important in branding in all of your information. A good example I sort of have off the cuff that's really accessible is a client that I work with owns an establishment, and her business is named one thing and her consumer calls it another. And she's frustrated with this, and she's come to me and said, I want to change how this works, and I want to basically make my customer call my business what I named it. And my response to her is, well, first, why would you waste your time? And second, they're taking ownership of your brand, and they've named it for you. And it sort of reflects to you that your name failed, but your business didn't fail. Your name failed. And so be moldable to that and allow your customer to carry that. You have built word of mouth, and if you want to do something really effective, then consider changing the name of your business to match what your customer has named it. And that's sort of, relinquishing some of that control, which I think can be tricky, but we have to be open to that and allow them that. Another interesting thing about the loss of control within a brand is that we're at a point in time when information travels faster than humans, largely powered by social media and mobile media. So engage the power of sharing. That goes back to that sort of idea of branding as gossip, or just really having your tight story and allowing your customer to carry it forward for you. And then also encourage that ownership of your brand. So once you've sort of built this story and you have these pieces and you're on the ground, when we work with people, basically we like to drive all of the story first and then get to, what are we showing, what are we telling in our development of any iconography, logos, that comes at the end of this. And all of that has to be that initial driver, defining those patterns. And so then we can build that iconography to package with it. We really think there's a balancing act of show and tell. We are in a world right now where we're increasingly stimulated, and so show works a lot more effectively than tell. And there are a lot of ways to sort of manage that. Anymore, we really encourage people in their budgets to assess implementing a 30 to 45-second video at the outset of their brand launch, because it is the best way to disseminate information and the kind of time people will give to something new. When you get into developing your iconography, there's a few key things that we start looking at out the gate. For one, we believe that simplicity always wins. In a world where we're increasingly stimulated and we're increasingly plugged in, our eyes need places to relax. And, for instance, like when I have taught or have taken on interns, I always send them on these sort of expeditions where they go to the grocery store, or I make them go research even poster marquee boards. And I say, I want you to walk up to the board, quickly open your eyes and tell me where your eye stops. And it will stop at the place that was the simplest. So, imagine a very heavily postered marquee, sort of, that is something you can find sort of in any town. A lot of times the place where your eye may stop the longest is either something that has a singular image on it, was maybe the largest thing on the marquee, but oftentimes you'll find that you stare for a really long time at the white piece of paper that probably says for rent. And so that's a very interesting piece that I always find to keep in mind, is simplicity always wins. And that really speaks to all visuals, logos, photography, and allowing people to relax. And people are looking for places to relax. We move incredibly fast, and there's some interesting study out right now that the world is effectively changing faster than we can adapt to it. So there needs to be a balance of really giving people the ability to experience joy and retreat in all of your peripherals. And simplicity for logos is highly important because you want to allow them several other modes, one of those being very versatile. They need to have cross-channel deployment. They've got to meet the needs of social media, to signage, to start to think about that hierarchy of how are you visually communicating your brand. Also, whereas people have talked for a long time about logos needing to be timeless, I always sort of struggled with that word, and I like this idea better about the need for them to be agile. They need to be agile, and they need the ability to evolve. And of course, they need to be scalable because size does matter. And they need to accommodate everything from a small, thumbnail to, very large signage, any implementations, billboards, wherever it's going to go. They really need that scalability. In the balancing act of show and tell, there's the tell piece. And we start with these three of quantify, validate, and testify. Quantification is incredibly powerful. Where I sit at the Creed Repertory Theater today, we've built some quantification for them in their marketing because a lot of people don't understand what repertory means. So in a very simple way, we can now, sort of tell you, they've got 2 theaters. they're running 7 plays over 18 weeks in one spectacular setting. And so that begins to tell you what they do in a way that the brain can quickly understand. Another really powerful piece to quantification is there's a real rise in infographics. And what's beautiful about infographics is that they can allow you to simultaneously show and tell. And that piece is really powerful. The really beautiful thing about playing with quantification within your branding is it's going to require that you have a really good handle on your own data, and it will allow you to be better visionary leaders about where your brand needs to go if you're keeping, your hands dirty in all of this information. Of course, again, utilize the third-party validation, encourage the sharing. Those are powerful things to testify, is listen to what other people say about you, and don't be afraid to use other people's testimony and ask for it to validate your brand in different ways. Sometimes that can be an ally or a partnership with another organization as well. And then most importantly in Tell is to utilize what we call poetic precision. Anymore, it's my belief, and I really encourage clients, like, okay, can you tell me this in 100 words? Okay, well, now tell me in 50. Okay, well, now how about 5? And drive it as tight as you can. 50 words is really the perfect soundbite, and it's a really great practice of basically poetic precision, or you can sort of think about, the basic journalistic style of writing and telling us everything in that first paragraph. We'll learn more if we want to, but that's basically what you're going to get people to pay attention to. Brand management, branding and marketing have changed so hugely, and there's really, I think, a new paradigm around it all. Whereas we've been in this industrial era around branding, we're now moving, as I said, into this experiential era. And in the industrial era, it was really, branding was looked at as a repetition. We constantly have people come in and just want a logo, and they just want to use it, and they want to use it repetitively, and that to them is the sum total of branding. And we see this at all levels, and sometimes in very large corporations, it's very fascinating. And branding really now is more of an iteration. It's temporal, it's built on patterns, it has to evolve. What's kind of fascinating about branding, and you look at this, the idea of repetitive and iterative, is that it's also simultaneously static and dynamic. And that's an interesting thing to tackle. But branding is sort of this puzzle, and we're driving solutions. Branding, too, is never ending and ever evolving. It is a story with no end, and it evolves as a conversation between the company and its customers, and that speaks to that relationship. And so your brand does have to be managed. It's not just setting a plan in motion at the beginning and then moving away from it. We're now seeing branding basically in the corporate structure, organizational structure. If you look at that as a pie, you've got your finance and accounting, and you've got all your major core functions within that carry that organization. And branding and marketing are effectively a third of the pie. And the reason that it's become so important to incorporate those as departments, whether it's a singular staff position or a company you work with, that you're, at least getting a quarterly review, something, inviting them to key meetings, is because a brand has to meet the demands of modern modalities. And there are a lot of them, and they're highly varied, and they require a lot of moment-to-moment, very reactive, fluid interactions. It's very easily digested if you think about sort of, the advent of Facebook and social media and watching people share and interact very quickly. I think on a scale more than we ever sort of imagined, the success of sort of social media. It's really pretty incredible. And so a brand really does require some intense management anymore, and is really something to plan for in your budget around how are you going to manage this brand on a regular basis. And branding, as Jamie said, is something that is really more of a science now. It was looked at as more of an art, and it's really more of a science and the study of consumer behavior. And it's, one of the great things about branding is, through the internet, we're logging huge databases and able to study ourselves about consumer behavior. So there's a lot of really powerful tools, and it makes branding a whole new sort of world of wonder and interest. Lastly, to wrap up, just sort of to give you our 30-second elevator speech and who we are, and just to sort of show how we've driven how we would talk about ourselves in 30 seconds, or myself, I basically say, I'm a professional storyteller. I believe in the inherent human pursuit to connect and mobilize efforts through shared story. These stories appeal to our senses and serve across time, space, modality, and circumstance. The best part is that everyone has a story to tell. At Rochambeau, we believe in helping our clients tell their stories. We blend a mix of show and tell to build emotionally engaging and relevant material to enhance brand communications for a versatile base of businesses and organizations. Our 24/7 revolves around all things that foster an everyday experience that is mindful, artful, and playful. Mind your art and play. With that, I applaud your efforts in the push for creating creative districts in the state of Colorado, and it's something I'm personally vested in, and I'm just glad to see so many people sign up today, so thank you.